then when you really get into them, there are differences. They're all basically full stock. The firing mechanism is a flintlock ignition. But when you get into the differences is the top of Bob's, that's not a sight, that's a bayonet lug. My rifle has actual rifle sight and a rear sight. There's no rear sight on the Brown Bess. And if he had a French version, which was the Charleville musket, that was the same setup. It was a smooth bore, basically like a shotgun barrel. The rifle had a rifle barrel where once the barrel was forged, it would have been put on a not a machine, but basically a wood setup with a spiral groove on it that would cut lands and grooves into the steel. And it would go back and forth and just spiral back and forth until the gunsmith had it cut to his specifications. Then once cleaned out and smoothed and that, it was ready to go. And of course, with a rifle, when the bullet was shot, it would, like throwing a football, it would spiral. More accuracy, greater distance. These certainly didn't have the range, but again, when the British and American line forces were using these in line formation, they were just laying down a wall of lead when they were shooting. They were pointing more than aiming to shoot, because at 50 to 75 yards, these were very effective. These would certainly reach out to 100, 150 yards. And as we were talking this morning a little bit about it, your riflemen, for the most part, at those distances would have been using a rest. That wouldn't have been just what they call offhand shooting like that. They would have been by a tree, had a crotch stick, or something to rest the gun, especially at that distance. The Pennsylvania or American long rifle, this is a style that would have been made in Pennsylvania. The furniture is an iron, the butt plate, trigger guard, nose cap, and ramrod thimbles. The Bess's, the furniture was all brass butt plate, trigger guard, ramrod thimbles, and nose cap. Larger caliber, 69 approximately caliber. Sometime they would make them, if they were officers model 72 or 67s. This happens to be a 40 caliber, which is a much smaller ball. Although rifles could have been 40, 45, 50, 54. And then back in the day, they would have had oddball calibers, maybe 47, maybe 52. And as the gunsmith made the rifles, because they were a one-of-a-kind item as opposed to being more of a mass-produced, he would often make a bullet mold that would fit the diameter of the ball needed for the bore of this gun. Now, Bob, I'll let him talk just a second on, or for a little bit, who he would have been representing on the Sullivan campaign.
I'm actually with Brant's Volunteers. We are, and we're loyalists. They went with the British side, and you had to choose. You either went with the rebels, him, or you went with the king. You couldn't be neutral, basically. So we went with the king because he was across the sea. He didn't bother us. Normally we dress. I have on a frock or a hunting shirt like him, and you can't tell us apart once you're in the woods. Except Brant's had a yellow ribbon to tell us apart. Otherwise, in the woods, you can't tell if you're a friend or foe.
And as Bob's saying, he's dressed more in civilian garb, yeah. But as a ranger and working with a volunteer organization like this, they wouldn't have been uniformed with more of a traditional British uniform, the red coat, so to speak.
When I go in the woods later on for the battle, I'll put on something more drab. It'll cover my waistcoat and cover. It's actually an outside rough coat is what it is.
Exactly.
You can't tell us apart. One thing, when Steve and I were talking earlier, with the ramrods, military guns have a steel ramrod.
Oh yeah. The rifle would have been wooden, hickory basically. They were really pretty sturdy for the most part.
Wiping stick and a ramrod. I think that's about it for...
And I just wanted to let them know, as far as Bobick just explained basically his clothing and what Brant's would have been wearing, I'm dressed more in the garb of a company that was on the Sullivan campaign under the command of Captain Anthony Seelan. He was a commissioned officer with the Continental Army that had a small group of riflemen comprising of about 45 that were actually on the Sullivan campaign. They basically raised their group down in Pennsylvania, and that's where they ranged in the early part of the war, but then fell in with General Hand's 3rd Brigade for the Sullivan campaign. And one interesting thing is we did research on Captain Seelan is his unit, even though it was small, they actually had a drummer and fifer, which you don't always equate with a rifle company. You're thinking that's more of the Continental Line group. But on the Sullivan March, because we were in the front of the Army with the Light Corps, which were often a mile ahead of the main body of the Army, we were dressed more in frontier garb, where we would have had a pullover frock. This one happens to be cape. We would have been wearing our leggings, and again, worked in conjunction with the Light Corps as we were probing out in front of the main body, which comprised almost 3,000 men. And one thing that I wanted to mention too, back to the rifle and musket too, just the ignition. We'll be loading and firing these in a minute, but as with all muzzleloading guns of the day, the loading procedure would have started with a cartridge with powder in it being poured down the muzzle, then the ball. Yep. Then the ball would have gone down. You would have rammed it home, returned it. You would have put a small amount of gunpowder in the pan of the lock. Then it would have been ready to fire. Half cock was a safety. When it goes back to full, you're ready to go. And if it's functioning properly, you're getting a good spark on your flint, which that really was. It should ignite the powder in the pan, which will ignite the charge in the breech of the gun, and then you're ready to go. As maybe some of you know, during the 18th century, if there were battles or skirmishes going on, they really weren't fought in rainstorms. The Battle of Oriskany was one example. It started out okay, thunderstorm came in, it was so wet it just stopped the whole engagement. So these really were, you really needed dry weather, and even we found doing the reenacting as much as we've done over the years, some days when you even get hot and humid weather, the humidity will soak it into that powder and make it harder for it to ignite.
Wow.
One counterpoint, he pointed out that his company was here in Newtown. Brant's was here also, but on the British side. We were with the Seneca Indians, we had the ambush set up. The only thing they cheated, they came in with cannons. Once the cannons started firing, we took off. We couldn't fight against the cannons. So, as it is, we're in the woods now, he's on one side, I'm on the other. And it's a lot of fun out there.
Exactly.
We're gonna do some shooting for you. We had one person who was supposed to be here, he's sick, and two others didn't make it this weekend, so we volunteered my wife to come out and shoot. But the ladies did shoot out there, just to make a point here. You had to shoot if you're on the frontier. So when some men were gone off, the militia were called out, they were the home guard. So you had to learn to shoot and probably hunt, I would say. So she's going to fill in anyways. We're going to do a little some target shooting first. We're going to show you the difference between a rifle and a musket. Steve's going to do both parts. He's going to use the musket, and we're going to shoot. I have a target. I'll give you this. All right? I'm going to go down, range down here. We're going to shoot this target here, the X. So the muskets, the way they loaded them, like you said, you'll watch him load it with a hey Steve, you want to load it up here and show him?
Oh yeah.
He's going to use a paper cartridge, there's no patch to it. It's a smaller caliber ball than the actual 75 caliber. So when that ball's in there, it slides down easy, it'll come out, it's not going to be a tight, accurate ball. But like he said, at 25, 30 yards, they just want to get the firepower down. So he's going to shoot this target, see how he does, and then he's going to take his rifle and shoot it, the target again.
So I've just primed the pan with some powder. I put the main charge down. Ram it. It's on half cock, so it's safe. Should be.
Should be. Oh my God.
My cup. Sorry. Things are off.
That was the plan.
Did I move or what?
Yeah.
We prime the pan. Take the powder and the ball, goes down the barrel, ran down to the breech. I'm loaded and ready to go. One thing I forgot here, I'm going to give you my timepiece. You can't keep it. We're gonna go for 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
You just tell us when you want us to shoot. You just say shoot or fire or whatever, and we'll fire.
Alrighty. Ready?
Yep.
Aim. Fire!
Cool.
Times the charm.
1 minute.
Okay, we're done. I got a hot one, don't count this one.
Does that gun get hot?
Yes.
Very hot. Yeah, that's why I'm hanging on to it like this. You can burn yourself on it. It's very hot. So technically you're supposed to get roughly 12 shots off in 3 minutes. Got one left, so it must be about 11 shots off.
That's what I counted on.
Anybody count for her? It doesn't matter because she's a civilian and she's just going to protect her home front. So basically, that's about how it was done. To give you an idea. So Steve is shooting, working out.
I got it to go off. You want to try it one more time, your thing?
Got 1 more minute, we'll do. Finish off the targets?
Yep. All or nothing.
Can you redeem yourself from shooting the can?
I can only hope.